Connection is the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship.
Turning towards each other and being curious about the other's experience, and knowing that we are able to connect.
Many a times, Dixon and myself, when we look at the 4 children, we thought that we are the one blessing them. And many times we know they are the one bring us immense amount of blessings.
如果你还那么坚持、那么执着，为了这些事情而闹得面红耳赤，那也还真的是对不起大家，也对不起自己了。就我觉得
不值得啊，
值得啊，对啊，就好好的珍惜这段可以当一家人的这个缘分。
Sometimes the bully was probably bullied themselves.
It's very important. We want a journey with people who have experienced bullying. But I think we also want to understand, why bullies bully you.
I kind of moved away from a traditional mindset to kind of run my own business now. It's fully attributed to whatever my dad has done in my young age.
What happened to these victims is that they did not have any empowerment. Someone forced sex on them. And so the helping process must reaffirm that sense of empowerment.
What I propose is upstream, to create an environment, a culture whereby we can talk freely with one another, address those issues in a friendly, loving way.
In order for advocacy to work, you have to work together with other people who share the same objectives or the same values.
Feeling stuck in a place, you actually don't know how to climb out of the hole, or you didn't know that you can actually just reach out a hand and someone might just help you by pulling you out. Find those linkages, those connections whereby you can seek help.
Something was taken out of you, and until you address that vulnerability in a single safe space, only then could the colors be brought back into the world that you live in.
Hello and welcome to REALink, which promotes real conversations about pertinent concerns. REALink is a virtual conversation series. We will be engaging our special guests and you, of course, in the virtual world. Together we'll be exploring various topics that matter in our society. The theme for this year's 2021 series, Rebuilding the Community, where we seek to reconnect with communities that have been adversely affected by societal issues, exploring what has and can be done to break the cycle of hurt. Now, REALink is also a campaign to raise funds to support the numerous projects that are being undertaken here by the Lutheran Community Care Services, otherwise simply known as LCCS. And as a non-profit social service agency, LCCS has been actively engaging and empowering individuals and families to build and sustain relationships. Focusing on restorative practices, LCCS has served and continues to serve families, schools, institutes, residential homes, and various organizations to restore relationships that have been harmed, connecting communities together. Now, LCCS is also a full member of the National Council of Social Service and has been accorded Institution of a Public Character status. And with that, let me just kick off our program. I'm Augustine Aswan, and it's my pleasure and privilege to host and moderate today's REALink Conversation, an online fundraising campaign. And alongside with me today, former District Judge Low Lih Jeng, who is presently the Senior Consultant at Sage Mediation, and Leonard Ng, Counselor and Consultant at LCCS. And we're coming to you live from these wonderful studios at LCCS premises here in Singapore. Thank you for being here and welcome to the REALink Conversation Series. This today is our fourth in our series, and today's topic, neighbors, disputes. You see, every fortnight on a Friday, we will be featuring local and international speakers who will share their perspectives on different topics, and this series, which kicked off in June, will be running all the way till November. And here at LCCS, we create this safe and meaningful space for our speakers to talk about what really matters, which is why we'd like you to get involved. And so we'd like you to share your thoughts and your questions. You can take a moment to key those questions into the comment section on screen, and our LCCS team will definitely gather those questions for our discussion. And we also like to seek your kind-hearted donation. You will notice a QR code at the bottom of the screen. And so please, once again, take note that your donation is eligible for a one-to-one matching, as REALink is part of the Tote Board Enhanced Fundraising Program. All donations above $10 are eligible for a 250% tax deduction. And so with all that said, let's kick off the REALink Conversation Series. I'd like to welcome Judge onto the conversation. Judge, thank you so much for taking time to speak with us. I did quite a bit of homework and I enjoyed doing this. I want to call this section the living environment, right? Now, regardless of your income level, whether you're living in public housing or in condominiums or even on landed property, literally the only thing that separates you from your neighbor is like a fence, a wall, a ceiling, or the floor above. Mm-hmm. And would you say it's inevitable that in a densely populated urban and living environment like Singapore, that inevitably you might get disputes with a neighbor? Your thoughts on that?
Well, thank you very much, and good evening, Augustine, for this invitation, and thank you very much to Lutheran for this invitation. It's a very rare opportunity for all of us to engage in mediation, to share and talk about the work that we do. So, coming back to your question, no, I don't think it's inevitable. That's the short answer. I think if we take a step back, look at the bigger picture, the vision for Singapore is to be a global city, to be a global society. In order to achieve that, we naturally will have to welcome people from a diverse cultures from around the world. The thing is that given the shortage of land in Singapore, it has to be high-rise, it has to be dense. But on the other hand, it doesn't have to inevitably give rise to disputes, because we can take this as an opportunity to live in close proximity with people from different cultures, different sounds, different smells, different sights, and isn't that so exciting?
Well, I like the way you put it, and I mean, I myself lived all my life in public housing. I see where you're coming from, but there are concerns that, when you have such close proximity, psychology 101, inevitably there might be opportunities for things to get a little bit difficult. The same sights and smells, what my neighbor is cooking, or the sounds that are emanating from my neighbor's household will inevitably rub off against us, little trigger points.
And I suppose that is what is happening, right? But as to the cause of it, the psychology of it is something that I cannot comment on. I'm not of the expertise. I think Leonard would be able to shed.
Great way to bring Leonard into the conversation. Your thoughts, Leonard?
Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Augustine. Well, I would have to say that we have been praised, in fact, from people overseas. Our affiliates, our counterparts who we engage with from the United States do tell us that it's amazing how we are able to live in such close proximity, how we have such a diverse culture, and people are able to respect each other's space, the cultures that we live in, the different routines that we have day to day. And myself, in my own HDB apartment that I live in, I do have different neighbors of different cultures as well, and we acknowledge that you have different routines and you've got different ways of how you do things. And it's about that harmonious community living. How do we build that relationship with each other? How do we approach each other when we need to have vulnerable conversations? How do we have conversations that matter? We talk about the good times, and definitely there will be bad times as well. But when you build that relationship, I have to say that it makes it easier to have conversations on things that needs to be worked out.
All right, so if you've just tuned in, you're actually joining us on the REALink LCCS 2021 online conversations about what matters, and today the topic is neighbors and disputes, and with me is former District Judge Low Lih Jeng and Leonard Ng from LCCS, and I'm still going to be the one who keeps pushing the button, so to speak. So Judge, I hear you, Leonard, I hear you, but still I want to pick up on this thing called boundary disputes. The exact boundary line in a high-rise urban dwelling with common corridors, with pets and animal noise and complaints about animal noises, the visual amenity when you have complaints about unsightly objects and materials. I could go on with the list when I did my research. So many trigger points, Judge. Again, your thoughts on that?
I don't know whether that is coming from a certain attitude that, it's all about me and how I want to live, and I'm not ready to understand why you as my neighbor do things differently, and actually also that's got to do with the stresses. If you're stressed out, your priorities are about work, your job, your children going to school, I got no time, Augustine, to talk to you and ask you, hey, Augustine, how come you're doing this thing so differently? Why do you cook differently? Why does your dinners smell different from mine?
I'm so glad actually you brought up this point about the stress, because the other thing that I found out is the disputes between neighbors over noise between the floors have grown from the research and the numbers that I've gathered, largely during this COVID-19 pandemic period. Keeping more people at home since early 2020, and Singapore is most certainly not alone in this situation. I actually found out even in South Korea, there's this thing called Chong Gan So I hope my Korean is correct, where it's literally, the translation is floor between and the noise, as in it is definitely an issue. Again, what are you hearing on the ground, yourself, Judge, and Leonard as well?
Leonard, you want to go first because you deal with a lot more of the community cases upstream, right? Whereas I only get to hear the ones which are really very, very difficult and intransigent.
Well, I would have to say that there definitely is a range, and there are different responses as well from the different neighbors that we do engage. I would have to say sometimes it leads to what is acceptable, and different people have different levels of acceptance, what they tolerate, how do they feel it's bothering them. And for some people, some neighbors do tell us that, it's fine, I'm perfectly okay with the noise, but there has to be a certain time when there has to be no noise, maybe because my infant is taking a nap, or my children are studying, or there's certain work that I have to have done, or
or I'm resting. People take different shifts of the day when we talk about work. And they do accept that noise is inevitable. It will happen. And those are the people who are able to come to terms with each other to have conversations about what can we do to make it work. If you have to make those noises for whatever it may be, maybe playing the piano, for example, is there a certain time that you can do it? And oftentimes neighbors do say, sure, let's work out something.
All right, so we'll come to that later in the conversation about what can we do, but you want to pick up on that, Judge? I mean, before the conversation, you shared your own personal experience about...
Yeah, I think what was very important and what's the crux of it is what Leonard said is it works if people have this attitude of what can we do? We is the most important thing. What can we do to make it work? And as Leonard said, people need to understand. It's not just about me, right? It's also about my neighbor. So they need to reach out to their neighbor, they need to talk to their neighbor, they need to understand their neighbor's lifestyle, and then try and find what we call as mediators common ground and make it work.
I mean, this is a 24/7 city, and people, as Leonard said, work on different shifts, and so not everybody's going to come back nicely at 6 o'clock in the evening, have dinner at this time. So you will have sounds from the neighbor above and stuff like that at odd times of the night as well.
Yeah, I mean, as I was, there was this case comes to mind because the complainant was downstairs and she was complaining about, water coming, the noise of water dripping from the pipes at about 10, 11 o'clock every night. I don't know what happened. It wound all the way to the courts. It came to me. And it just turned out to be very simple. The neighbor upstairs was late. She comes home at 10 o'clock at night. And she just needs to hand wash the set of clothes that she's wearing. She doesn't want to use the washing machine. Ironically, she was considerate enough not to use the washing machine because she knew that it was going to create even more noise. So she washes her clothes. And then she pulls the plug, and then the water goes down the pipe, and that was it. That was one of the easier cases.
But yet it came to you.
Yes, what flabbergasted me was why is it they couldn't talk it out?
Well, that's exactly what we're going to explore today in this conversation. But I'm glad you brought it up because it came all the way to you in the court.
Yeah.
But was it resolved in the end?
It was resolved, and this was one of the easier ones.
All right. So another word that I picked up so far in the conversation, you kicked it off, Judge, when you talk about we're living with a diverse community. There's this word that keeps coming up is, well, all right, we'll tolerate what my neighbor is doing. But is tolerate the best word? Shouldn't we also be bringing in words like acceptance? Or are we talking utopia here?
Actually, I agree with you. Tolerance, actually, if you want to do it in plain English, it means that I don't like it, but I will live with it. That's tolerance, right? But I think if we want to improve and live in a much nicer community, we are looking at one, understanding. That's the next step, and after understanding, accepting. So if there are differences, right? Let's understand why we are different, and after that say, okay, I understand why you're doing it, it's different, and it's okay, I can accept that we are different.
All right, so we hope you're enjoying this conversation so far, and please don't forget to send your questions and comments in, and we'll get our panel to respond to you. Leonard, you want to pick up on what Judge just shared?
I would like to share a personal story. So, a couple of years back, my immediate family, we spent some time overseas. And when that project was over, we came back home to live, and because we had to rent out the house during that period of time. When we came back, naturally we had to do a little bit of renovation, get stuff back in order. And we did a little bit of drilling. And that was in the early afternoon. I had a neighbor actually, he was living below me, but the noise permitted because of the drilling. So he came up and he asked, what's going on? And I said, there was an issue with the main door. The lock was not working so well, and we needed to get that fixed. And we just came back. And he was like, okay. And then he went off. Now the week after that, there was still some other stuff that I had to do, so there was a little bit more drilling. He came back up again, and he said, what's going on? You're still doing the drilling, I understand that you had to fix the door, but it seems to be going on every week. And I asked him, what are you affected by? And he said, because the time that you're drilling, I know it's in the afternoon, but I have an infant, and I didn't know. And then I knew now that that he had an infant. I asked him, what do you think would be best for you? What will work for you? And then he said, I accept that you have to have the house fixed. And I know that it's in the afternoon, but are there other times that you can do it? Maybe before you do any renovations in future, would you be able to inform us? And I said, sounds great. The next time I did have some minor renovations, I went down, I knocked on his door, and I told him that there's some stuff that I have to fix. What's a good time for you? And he kind of like gave me some timing, and I did it during that period of time. And that fixed the issue. In fact, after that, we actually became friends. We acknowledged each other at the lobby, we said hi, we greeted, and it was all good.
So listening to this, Judge, I mean, it all starts with the person actually physically walking up to the neighbor and starting this conversation, right?
Yes.
In an ideal world, that would be the best thing?
Yes. I think we call it reaching out. Neighbors going up to the door, knocking on the door. We also call it listening, right? Telling the other side what your concerns are. And then we also say that the other side must also listen to what the concerns of the complainants are. And then trying to work together to find a solution that works for both. And that Leonard's example is the perfect example.
You know, it's interesting. I mean, when I was doing research on this topic, it just as trivia for all of you who are watching this, that in South Korea, there's an actual law that came into place where the floors have to be at least 21 centimeters thick to allow adequate soundproofing. So if we come back to the Singapore context, I mean, for those who can afford it, they can actually do carpets, rugs, and all this, padding and sound deadening floor insulation, and the list goes on to cut the noise. But the vast majority are not going to go down that track. They can't afford it, full stop. So the only track available is to actually live as good neighbors. So my question to both of you is, why is it so hard to do that? Why?
Why? I don't know. Why is it so hard to... Okay, one, I think, I don't know why. No, actually, I don't know why. People need to want to go and talk about it, right? Okay, I think the crux of it is people are not listening. Sometimes, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. The neighbors go up, they knock on the door and say, hello, there are all these noises coming out from your flat. Can you please do something about it? Okay, so there's this example. Okay, complainant says that every time she walks past this flat, she hears strange noises coming out from the flat. She's convinced that the neighbor is yelling at her, harassment. Again, wound its way to the courts. And, okay, so why didn't the respondent, the person who was allegedly coming, why couldn't the respondent tell the complainant that the noises were coming from his two very young children who were differently able? Right? And every time they hear someone walking past the front of their flat, they get very upset, they get very agitated, and so they react. But he couldn't tell her that. He had to come all the way to the courts to tell me that in a private session and confide, and then I will have to I conveyed that situation to the complainant, and then she understood and then she accepted it.
So this is a family with children with special needs.
Special needs.
And he just couldn't find his to say it out
directly
loud.
to the neighbor. So why do people do that? This is one category, right? They're embarrassed, maybe they're ashamed, or sometimes we don't know what happens when they actually engage. There's a way of communicating.
Yeah.
At best, let's give people the benefit of the doubt. They attempt to communicate, but because of I don't know, communication styles, maybe it's language, cultural differences, it becomes a miscommunication. Some things that's said with the best of intentions, some things that's said in a very loud tone. Some people talk very loudly, right? And then the other side will take offense and they think that they're being shouted at, and then it spirals.
So picking up on what Judge shared, Leonard, I mean, in your work at LCCS, it takes a lot of effort for an individual to open up, right? I mean, it's all that privacy, you have to sort of like put it aside and say, I'm going to take a risk here and to share this with my neighbors in order to seek understanding, as you said, and acceptance of the current realities. Your thoughts?
That's really quite true. So one of the projects that we run together with the state courts is called Project Restore. And that is a reference point of this conversation as well in terms of the work that LCCS does. And in Project Restore, we get referrals from the state courts on, to be honest with you, very difficult cases of neighborly disputes. And a lot of these disputes, we do have neighbors who do have difficulties engaging each other. The willingness to be vulnerable, the willingness to really tell somebody how they're affected, why they're affected, and what do they hope can be done to have it resolved. And so when they engage with us, they do have a story to tell. Everybody has a story to tell. And their story, I would like to say that their story, it does not matter whether or not it's accepted by other parties. The point of it is that it's their reality. But how do we bring people together to have that conversation? And that's where we come in as a third party to provide them that safe space. It's all about that safe space for people to be vulnerable enough to share how they're truly affected. And when you hear their stories, you start to realize that there are just certain trigger points. And if we could find a way to get people to talk about what triggers each other, how can we mitigate it, what can we do to find ways to accept the triggers and work around it. And we have quite a couple of cases where after the conversation they realized, I didn't know that was what's causing you this agony. And they decide, let's work it out. And then they work it out. But that couldn't happen without that conversation.
Yeah. So beautiful, and we are making a good progress. And once again, a gentle reminder, this entire conversation series is being recorded, and so that if you do know of someone or a friend you feel should be watching this, please do share the link to the conversation. Of course, we would love to have you watching us live right now. Project Restore is certainly one thing they can look up, right, Leonard, on your website as well?
Yes, I mean, in fact, Project Restore is not only something that we would work on when it's a referral. It is possible for neighbors as well to step forward to tell us that, hey, we need to have a conversation, and then our facilitators will go onto the ground and provide a safe space for people to have that vulnerable conversation.
All right. So, sorry, you're going ahead.
Yeah, let me just wind back a bit.
Please.
Because what we're talking about is the easy one, where they know what the problem is, right? But they are very hesitant to talk about it. The more difficult ones are the ones where they cannot articulate what the problem is. That is the one I think is difficult. So let me give you an example, right? There was this complaint about this lady who basically harangues all her neighbors right down the corridor. And she even waits for them at the town center, and when she sees them walking towards her, she would just basically curse and swear. Not just the neighbors, but the generation before and the generation after, right? So why does she do this? She cannot tell you why she does it. But later on, as we carried, I talked to her in a private session in confidence. She's elderly. She has children, but children are not with her. They're not even in Singapore, right? And she's bordering. You can see she's bordering on dementia, right? So not quite with it, But she cannot articulate. She's upset with the neighbors. The neighbors say, no, I didn't do anything. But she's upset with the neighbors. So these are the ones that are difficult. They cannot articulate what is it that's bothering them. And the neighbors also probably don't have the time and the patience to engage her, talk to her, understand her as a person, and realize what she's going through. And that's why, again, neutral third parties like LCCS, like mediators will come in, they can assess the situation, and they can articulate the situation and bring the message across.
Right. We're going to talk about that definitely in this conversation, and also the role of mediators, neutral people, if lack of a better word, and the sort of soft skills that are needed for this. But I want to gently move the conversation on with the remaining time we have to the midpoint. I'm calling this next session, next part of the discussion, hiding behind the camera, because you know why? I found out from my research, if I were to cite the media reports again, some experts are warning that the repeated exposure to such noises can lead to depression and insomnia. This is what I found out. And yet, instead of investing in FaceTime to actually talk to your neighbor about it, people are investing in CCTV camera equipment and the use of their smartphones, right, to gather evidence instead of speaking. No progress on dialogue. Against this backdrop, Judge, what is your recommendation on how to move forward on this sort of preoccupation with surveillance and cameras and stuff like that?
Okay, let me try and sort of unpick that and look at it from the mediation process, right? Or from this dispute resolution process. They are using the cameras and CCTVs to gather evidence. They want to gather the evidence to show that what they're saying is correct. So they want to be heard. They want to be heard and they want to be understood. That's the most important thing.
Want to be heard, want to be understood.
Yeah, they want to be heard, they want to be understood, and they're doing it loud and clear. See, I've got this evidence, you don't believe me? Now I show you the camera here, I've got the CCTV, I play the video for you. So what are they doing? They want to be heard. And they want you to understand how they're feeling. So that's what's happening. So the camera and the CCTV are just mediums, the modes in which they basically want to say, listen to me.
But in the process, I don't know, Leonard, I mean, does that add to the problem as well? I mean, all
Definitely. I mean, now, in a lot of the neighbors that we have engaged, I'll be very upfront with you to say that it does not start with the CCTV. It does not start with the surveillance. Their story goes, I reached out to the RC. I reached out to grassroots leaders. I went to the community centers. I called PA. I even went to try to talk to the minister, you know,
see my MP.
Exactly.
In other words, they list all the steps that they tried to pursue before this.
I called the police as well. Police came down. I was trying to articulate what's happening for me, you know. So there is a series of different, I would say, pit stops that this situation has resulted in before finally reaching to the stage where, all right, it has to go public. I have to do something about it.
All of these stops, nobody heard them. They never felt that they were understood. And that's why it escalates.
Escalates to this.
So that's the process and that's the reason why all this is happening.
Yeah, so I mean, it is a concern because again, in Singapore, the top 3 neighbor dispute claims in 2020, noise, litter, and surveillance. And that's why we brought this up. So conducting surveillance on the resident's home, I mean, this drive to collect evidence because they want to be heard, they want to be understood, but not willing to talk. Has this smartphone thing become sort of like the Achilles heel in the process? I'm just trying to push the buttons here.
I suppose what it's done, it's given them another medium and another way of being heard. In the olden days, I suppose before all this happened, they'd be yelling at each other.
But now, some would argue loving thy neighbor has become more of a challenge because they feel that, you mentioned just earlier, we are living through a rather challenging time, not only in Singapore, in many other countries. They have lockdown. Here we call it the circuit breaker period, working from home, home-based learning, all these scenarios. When you're stuck at home 24/7, you suddenly notice your neighbors' foibles that went unnoticed before, but now you're staying at home more, they start to niggle at you and it starts to move from irritation to the point where it becomes a dispute. The lawyers say, be careful about legal action because even if you win, you'll have to spend the next day still having to live next to the neighbor or the person that you started this whole process with. Again, your thoughts?
Well, there's a lot to unpack in there.
Yeah, I know. I tend to put it all in.
Okay, no problem. One is, in addition to the circuit breaker and the home-based learning, I think we also have to add in the fact that we're an aging population, so there are a lot more retirees who are spending a lot more time at home.
Thank you for bringing that up.
And then there are a lot of more elderly residents who are not going out as often as you would imagine in a younger population, right? They'll be out of the house most of the day. So that adds to the stressors. I don't know whether that's the correct word for it. Right?
So this is what you're saying is that this is the current reality that we are all living with.
Yeah, more people are staying at home.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one. What was the second point?
Well, I mean, it's this thing about going to the courts and getting legal action. Even if you win, you're still going to have to live with your neighbor the next day.
So, I mean, for me, on a personal basis, I would always encourage people to resolve it. We call it upstream, but that's a technical term. That means resolve it as early as possible. If they talk, and if they can't talk, then look for someone who can help them talk. And it could be, it could be grassroots. Actually, no, never mind grassroots. It could be a friend. It could be a neighbor, right? That's the informal thing. Then, of course, then you move up one scale. There's the RC and all that. And then after that, you want to go into institutions. Of course, there's Lutherans, organizations like Lutherans. Then one step, which is a little bit more formal, is then you go to the Community Mediation Center, which is set up by the government. And that one, you actually have to fill in a form. And I'm not sure whether you have to pay some money. But you have to fill in a form. You cannot be represented by lawyers. You go there yourself. So that's really a little bit more formal.
All right.
If you
but it's good to know that it's out there.
Yeah. Then, of course, after that, you come to the courts. Why would I not encourage you coming to the courts? Because it becomes very formal. And I was looking at the State Courts Guide that was published by the courts. There's almost 7 steps, You have to fill in this form, you have to go through the thing, and then you have to file it, you have to serve it, the other side has to turn up. There are almost 7 steps you have to go through before the court finally makes an order. And the difficulty with that always is that it becomes a third party imposing something on the disputants which they may not necessarily agree with, because it is very evidence-based. It is not what we call interest-based. I'm not interested in why you're making all these noises. I just know that you're making these noises and it exceeds so many decibels, and therefore it's noise. I'm not interested in the fact that whether you have children who are differently able with special needs, whether you have an elderly at home or you have someone living at home who has a mental disorder. I'm not interested in all that, right? So that's a problem.
But it's nice to hear you being passionate about what you call the upstream avenues that are available, including work being done by LCCS. London, do you want to add on any other points on this?
Actually, Judge made a very important point. And when we started Project Restore with the state courts, prior to that, we did ask, the state courts, what is their interest in working together with a community partner in engaging neighbors. And this was coming from a district judge. And she said that, it is very easy for a judge to just simply give an order. It is very easy. If I wanted to solve the case, if I wanted to put people at that place, I just have to simply give an order. But at the end of the day, you cannot escape from the idea of community. Community will always be there. Whether you like it or not, it doesn't matter where you live in, there will always be community, and you have already purchased that house, you are going to be living with that community. And it's not, and no district judge is going to give an order for people to be evicted. It is their right to live there. So I can give an order, but at the end of the day, giving an order, both parties still lose. There isn't really the best outcome when it comes to an order from an authority figure. So that is why Project Restore was created. It was the idea of giving empowerment back to the community, for people to talk about, look, what can we do to come together to be on the same page, to talk about what matters and how can we work things out, because I don't want a judge to give me an order that I don't think I can live with. Or a judge giving my neighbor an order, and it seems like it works for me, but actually not quite. In fact, now my neighbor is going to find another reason to get back at me, and we have had cases, where they are going back and forth.
All right.
The complainant becomes the complainant becomes the respondent becomes the complainant, and it's never ending. So where does all this end? And the judge says, it always goes back to the community.
Right. So on that point, you've been just listening to Leonard Ng, who's a counsellor and consultant in LCCS, and of course our special guest today is a former District Judge Low Lih Jeng, and we're on the midpoint right now. So if you permit me, for those of you who are just joining us, you're watching the LCCS REALink 2021 Virtual Conversation Series, where we are discussing pertinent societal issues, and it's all about bringing communities together. And the theme this year, of course, is rebuilding the community. And I'm Augustine Nathwan, joined by Judge Low Lih Jeng and Leonard Ng from LCCS. Our topic we've been discussing so far, neighbours and disputes. This is also a LCCS fundraising campaign, so once again we'd like to seek your support. If you want to gift a donation, you can use the QR code at the bottom of the screen as well as the comments section, and you'll be glad to know that your donation is eligible for a one-for-one matching, as REALink is part of the Tote Board Enhanced Fundraising program. Every donation above $10 is eligible for a 250% tax deduction, and all donations will go towards supporting LCCS and empowering and engaging individuals and families to build and restore relationships. And so let's carry on with our conversation. Just to finish up on that section we talked about hiding behind the camera. When complaints about loud footsteps and running and all that is out there, the advice always, listening to both of you, is to try to talk it out with your neighbors. But not everyone is patient, Judge. Not everyone has those, it comes equipped with those soft skills like empathy and communication and problem solving. So how does one move forward then?
Well, you need to find that third party to do it for you. I mean, of course, we hope that the disputants themselves have it, but obviously they don't have it. That's why they're not happy, right? So you need to find that third party. I mean, put it bluntly, you need to seek help from outside.
But I like to pick up on what you said earlier. You're a believer, even though you're a judge from the courts, and yet you believe in the upstream avenues that are available out there. So what can one do, listening to you right now, to resolve a common neighbor dispute without going to court?
I think we should make this huge, what we call whole of village effort to empower and train. Okay, let's not use empower. To train, to train community leaders, or for that matter, anybody who works with the community, right? And it could also even be as simple as the policeman, where they go and make the police report. The policeman comes and the policeman talks to them, There is a certain way of talking to people, to empathize, to ask the right questions, to draw out their underlying interests, and to be able to communicate the messages so that they can understand each other, and to try to think about what is the way of look for that common ground, right? To be able to resolve it. So it could be the policeman, it could be the CC, it could be the CCC, it could even be when they go and meet the MP. Maybe you could even train the MPs, I don't know. Well,
I mean, listening to you is like, wow. So now if you're a police officer, and I'm sure they get the special training for this, so they will all have to be equipped with these
It's a special set of training skills,
Yeah. But I'm going to put you both on the spot. The question just came in, so that's wonderful. Thank you for your question. I'm going to read this verbatim. What advice would you give to someone who has tried all methods and ways to solve the conflict with the neighbor? Example, getting third party, tried to talk and listen, but to no avail.
Then you have to come to the courts and you have to get someone to give the order. The judge will make the order, but on the other hand, given all the difficulties of having a judge impose an order, we also get people who breach the order, right?
Well,
and then it just goes round and round in a circle.
But right now, this is a genuine question coming from our viewers. So you just heard it from our judge. That's the next step, and I know it's difficult, but actually that's one of the things that I did in myself, and I did the research. But before I move on, Leonard, you want to add on to this question as well?
I would have to say that in reality, there will be cases.
Yeah, you cannot resolve.
That's right. There will be cases that would be so complex and so difficult that it has reached a point where even the judge, I wouldn't say that the judge would not be able to resolve it. An order can be passed, again, like what the previous district judge had told me, but whether it's favorable, And it really boils down to what were all the various supports, the system, the policies, the buffer zones, what were all those different interventions or proactiveness upstream work that could have already been in place to prevent such a possibility? What was missing?
So let's put it in context. So what we're trying to say is, let's try and resolve it without having to go to the end stage, which is to get someone to order you to do something. That's what we're trying to avoid, right? But if it can't, and it results in someone having to order the parties to do something, and it still doesn't work, then actually, honestly, they have to move out. There's nothing else they can do.
All right, I know it's not easy to take that all in, but to the person who shared this question, I hope this is helping in some way. But if I may, as the moderator, if I were to pick up from both our speakers today, don't give up. Perhaps it's still possible to try again a third-party mediation. Can we just say that to the person who's posed the question?
Well, I would like to say that at the end of the day, and we circle back to the word acceptance. What is that level of acceptance? So knowing that I have done everything. I've spoken to the MP, I've spoken to the police, I've gone for mediation, I've gone to the district judge, I've sought support from social service agencies, and I've done everything and it's still not working out. Then again, it goes back to yourself. What have you decided that you could do in your own capacity? And it is not easy, for sure, it is not easy. Some of the neighbors that we work with, they have resorted to, that's just the way life is. This is the new norm for me, and it's something that I have to accept. I just have to find ways around it, and I think through this entire journey, I realized that at the end of the day, it is still up to me to decide if I want to move out finally, or I find other ways to mitigate this issue.
That's resignation, right? Sorry. It's resignation of the fate, right? Not really acceptance, right?
Well, I would say that you would have to accept. You would have to reach the stage where you accept that this is going to be your new norm, and whether you can live with that or not, it's your own threshold.
I'm listening to both of you, Judge, and in the research that I did, I picked it up. Are you required by law, when you finally said move out, to record this, that you had a dispute with a neighbor? Are you required to mention that to the next person who purchases the flat or the dwelling?
I don't think so.
No.
I don't think so.
No.
No,
you just sell.
You just move out.
So if you ever want to buy a property, do your due diligence, find out why the guy is moving out.
All right, so that's another piece of advice for you, but I sincerely hope you don't have to go there. But let's push on. I heard both of you, which is very much what I picked up in my own research. I mean, there are charts out there that is public information that's available to you, but like I said, you can always reach out to LCCS to find out more information as well. That the chart says seek help from grassroots leaders, and you talked about even the police officers, and they should have the special training and the soft skills to try and come in at that upstream level, first stage of mediation. But in Singapore, we have the Community Mediation Center that handles neighborly disputes, and residents are protected from neighborly acts that cause nuisance. Again, there are some additional laws. Before I go to the laws, can you talk to us about the Community Mediation Center? Is that part of the upstream, or is that already going towards courts itself?
I think that is like the penultimate step before the court, the Community Mediation Center. I think it was set up by the government, and the people there are trained mediators. A significant number of them are justices of peace, so they do speak with some authority, with the added fact that they are trained in mediation skills.
But Community Mediation Center, no lawyers present?
No lawyers present, so they appear in person, less of a pressure, less formal. But actually, sometimes as a mediator, I prefer the lawyers to be present, because sometimes they can articulate what the parties cannot articulate, and there's a level of control. But anyway, for them at least, it's less intimidating.
But again, would lower income families be able to afford?
So I think that's what it's targeted at. Cheaper, you don't have to, you just turn up, say your piece. Hopefully the mediator can communicate the thing.
All right, so there's avenues for them as well.
There's avenues for them. So that's CMC.
Okay.
I think it's been effective, because I would imagine, I think their settlement rate is quite high. quite substantial.
Leonard, you want to add on?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the CMC
Yeah,
has been fairly effective.
Yeah,
and and frankly speaking, quite a lot of the grassroots leaders themselves are volunteers of the CMC.
Yeah.
And they have that skill, they're trained as well. So whether or not they take it formally at CMC, or they really go down to the ground and have that informal engagement with the neighbors, I mean, I would say that definitely some form of mediation does happen fairly often.
Yeah.
Now, I just want to bring this up, although I personally really hope we don't have to go there. There are two laws, the Community Disputes Resolution Act, which basically prohibits causing unreasonable interference. And by the way, there's a whole explanation as to what unreasonable interference is, and I apologize if I smiled at that, with the neighbor's enjoyment or the use of his home. And then there's the Protection from Harassment Act. And Judge, all these acts that are there, justified as they may be, to address the problem of nuisance neighbors. And then there's also another one where you can apply to the Community Dispute Resolution Tribunal as an avenue of last resort. Now, all this for a layperson like me sounds sort of daunting. It's like it's complicated.
Don't come.
Don't come.
Don't come.
Then how?
Okay, come. Okay, sorry, what's your question?
No, I mean, all these laws that are there, they are there for a purpose. And there's also this Community Dispute Resolution Tribunal as an avenue of last resort. But I'm just saying, it sounds like a lot, it's like really complicated, and some people may genuinely be afraid to go down that path.
It is, but as we said, I think there are some disputes, the nature of which can only be resolved if they come before a judge, right? Why? One, somehow they feel that they have to tell their story before a judge, right? Because somehow in their views we represent the system, we're not part of government, but they feel that we represent government, and if judge understands, then the party has had their say. There are some people who will not be nice about it. They won't give and take unless a person with authority says, do it, or else. Then they say, okay, I'll do it. So we do serve a purpose. But I mean, I think it's nicer if we as a community, we are 56 years old, if we can all live together and understand each other and give and take and all that, right? So I think, does that answer your question?
It does, Judge.
That's where we are.
And Leonard, I mean, for you wouldn't even want to go there, right? I mean, you would try to resolve it.
That's why he set up Project Restore, right?
Well, in all honesty.
But you did say in the earlier part of the conversation, there are some very difficult, complicated situations where these laws and the tribunal and all will come.
Yes, but to be frank, even those complicated cases, when you hear from the neighbors, they really have tried to resolve it on their own. It is more of the last measure. They've tried everything at odds and they don't know what else to do. They go for that.
Yeah.
So today, my friends, we have tried our best to sort of give you an opportunity. I mean, as the moderator, I try to do my homework to sort of paint all the realities on the ground. And we have come to this part of the conversation, but still, part of the REALink online conversation series is about finding also community solutions. So I want to, switch back to Leonard to kick off this part. Leonard, what are some of the community solutions you feel our viewers out there should be aware of?
Community solutions, I would say, well, there are the formal ones and the informal ones, of course. The formal ones would be going to CMC, it could be going to the grassroots leaders. Some of them go to people's associations for support. Actually, some of them go to the community centers as well, to seek support from.
Just nice. Another question just came in, and I'm going to read this verbatim. How about the role of family members, either from the same household or extended family? How can they be part of the solution?
That's a really good point, actually. And in fact, in Project Restore, what one of the the key principles of bringing people together is also the idea of widening the circle. You want to widen that network of support for the person. You know, when they come before the judge, if they create a case, it's often person A versus person B. It's an individual thing. You know, there isn't a let's bring people together and then let's talk about what can we do to have the solution. It's really a individual versus another individual. But where we come in, we really focus on who else has been affected. How about other neighbors? Can we bring them together? Maybe other neighbors might even have solutions to this issue. And there are quite a couple of cases that we've worked on where when we brought people together, they were able to come up with a solution to live together.
So this is a nice segue to you, George. I'm going to put you on the spot. Can the authorities, for instance, picking up on that, make it compulsory for parties to turn up for mediation and counseling before you come and see me as a judge?
Actually, so let's backtrack a bit. So the quick answer to that question was yes, right? Family members, that yes, but they have to have that mediation skills, counseling skills, be able to bring people together. So that was the quick answer.
So I hope you heard that, so that the answer is yes to your question.
Yeah,
right?
anyone, right? Anyone who can help. Why not? Okay, so your question was...
can you make it compulsory for parties to turn up for mediation and counseling before they come to see you, judge? Do we even have such a law in the place?
Oh, actually, yes. The magistrate's complaints are subject to compulsory mediation. Okay, so one of the foundations of mediations and why mediations work is supposed to be mediation should be voluntary. If the parties come to mediation and they have no interest in resolving the issue, it's not going to work.
So being forced to in a way also doesn't
So
work.
being forced to in a way won't work. But sometimes it works because forcing them to go for mediation creates the opportunity, the venue for them to talk it out. Basically, go lah and just talk it out, which they never would do if it wasn't made compulsory.
But this will all be flagged in a sort of a report. So when they do finally come to you as a judge and say, okay, you've tried all this, you've even tried mediation, didn't work, I see you now. Is that how it works?
No, it's not so. It's not so. I mean, it's a lot more informal than that. For the fact that at the courts, if they appear before us, we just say, yeah, thank you for coming. You cannot drag them and force them, right? For the fact that they turned up. Does compulsory mediation work? Yes, to the extent that it makes them make the attempt to try to resolve it. But it will not work if they have no intention whatsoever to find a solution. They just want to go there to quarrel. What do you think?
Yeah, that's quite right. It still goes back to the individual. I mean, anybody can go to any authority, anybody can do any kind of an informal kind of a solution or engagement, even with RC members, but it still boils down to the individual on whether they want to have that engagement with each other to make it work. We've had cases where the district judge did tell them, go for this mediation first. At the mediation, only one party turned up.
It doesn't work.
So anyway, to recap that earlier question about the role of family members, either from the same household or extended family, can they be a part of the solution? The short answer is yes.
Yeah, that's sorry with a caveat, but they must be neutral. That's the thing, they have to be neutral. Because if the family member for one of the parties turn up, and then as they talk, the other side feels that this third part or family member is taking sides, it's not going to work.
True. I mean, that's
to add on to that. I mean, you're quite right with the idea of being neutral. But to add on to that, so the idea of widening the network of support is also to counterbalance that idea of whether someone is being biased to the other people. So we usually engage with different people to ask them, in what capacity, your role, how do you see yourself supporting this circle that we are coming to? How do you see yourself providing a solution to this issue? And then we find people to really come together to talk about, to support each other. It's not always about I versus you. When it comes to the community setting, it's all about let's be on the same page.
Yeah, because sometimes the solution is not with the parties. The solution needs the support of somebody else other than the two people who are arguing to make it work?
So we began our conversation with an urban landscape in Singapore, densely populated, close proximity to one another, even in a landed property situation. We talked about the environment, we talked about even the thickness of the floor that you're living in. I mean, that's the research. We found out about laws that are there to protect you and you can turn to it. We talked about hiding behind the camera, this preoccupation of collecting evidence and surveillance, which is also one of the top 3 neighbor disputes at least in the Singapore context. And we talked about trying to do everything upstream, mediation, even hoping that the people that you meet have those soft skills like empathy, communication, and stuff like that. And really, and you're hearing it from the judge, don't come to us until it's a matter of last resort that you have to. Then it's good to know that there is a center for community mediation center, and there are laws in place. With the final few minutes that we have, I'm going to throw it back to our 2 speakers and of course our special guest, Judge. First of all, thank you for your questions today. It's great that you are getting involved and participating, but it's also a fundraising program, so we'll once again invite you towards the end to see whether you can help us, with your gifted donations. But Judge, in the home stretch, parting thoughts. One of the words that came up, which I personally think maybe you may want to share your thoughts on this, tolerance versus acceptance. Would you like to add on your personal reflections on this?
I think we should aim for acceptance because that is a higher threshold, right? I mean, that's just my take. And I think we can do it. I think we should just look at what's happening now, the increase in the number of complaints and disputes. I mean, let's have some hope. Let's take a look at let's take what is happening now as an aberration, as an exception.
So even COVID aside, I like your earlier point about 56 years of nation building. We should come on, sit down.
I think we can do it.
Yeah.
I think it's good to have conversations like what we're having now, because I think it's created a lot of awareness of the reasons as to why we're having these disputes. And I think it's very useful that we talk about actions that are being taken. And I think for me, it's very encouraging and it's very heartening to know that organizations like Lutherans, are getting engaged, reaching out to the community to help everybody find the solution. So I think we can make it, and I think we'll get there.
So Leonard, picking up on what Judge shared earlier in one of those wonderful case studies that she shared, families with children with special needs, with people with dementia. I mean, these are the realities that we kind of kept quiet and we didn't want to openly discuss it, but now, even mental health issues as well. Yeah. All this needs to come out in the open, but still people find it hard and it's difficult, right? What would you say?
Ooh, that is a tough question, because it really boils down to so many factors: how articulate a person is, how the willingness to speak, the willingness to seek help, the willingness to engage, and it really boils down to even wanting to, and a person seeing themselves as part of the community. It's not just myself living here, but part of the community. Sometimes I would say that it does take the effort of other neighbors as well to make the first step, to make the first move, to say, hey, I'm having a dinner. Do you want to come over? I mean, I know in COVID times now, that's going to be pretty tough, right? But in reality, I mean, COVID will pass, and we're going to go back to a certain norm of life, and that's where can other people step forward to say, let's try to build a cohesive community. It may not be an entire block, that's probably a dream come true for RC members especially, but how about on the same floor, or even just that's clustered units that are together,
Yeah.
Can someone, a more articulate one, someone who is more willing to be out there to say, let's try to build the relationships, and circling back to the idea of acceptance, I think acceptance, oftentimes, I wouldn't say all the time, but oftentimes, the idea of acceptance is the outcome of a relationship that has been built. because of that relationship being built, that's why I can accept what's happening.
Okay.
Right. So that's something to consider as well.
Thank you.
The idea of community living.
Thank you, Leonard. Listening to you, I mean, there are so many things running in my mind, and of course, I want to bring up more questions, but I have to be mindful of time. Judge, we have come to the end of the discussion. I'm getting a cue from our technical team, 2 minutes. And so we have this very special tradition, and we're going to show our appreciation to you, Judge. Yes, Judge Lau, for joining us. And this is actually a very special Fables talk, token of appreciation, but I'm going to let Leonard say more about this. But this will come to you soon as a special gift. But Leonard, you want to add on?
Yeah, so actually Fables Talk is pretty much some stories that have been written by the LCCS colleagues. And it's going to be put together into an ebook that will be launched in August, late August, I would say. The different stories that are put together are very simple, fables that really depict values, simple values and principles in life. And it talks about quite a lot of the principles and the conversations that we've had, you know, all the positive values, all the idea of widening in a circle, people having a voice, community living, and all your really basic principles. They're all wrapped up into all these little stories. And what we're doing as a gift for our guest speakers really is to give you guys these stories wrapped up as in a deck of cards and just offering to you as a remembrance of your engagement with
thank
us.
you, thank you very
much. So do look
much.
out for it, Judge. And
Yes.
at the back of it, they do have reflection questions, which I like, because one of the things that we've tried to do in our conversation series is to launch our discussion with a whole set of critical thinking questions. And we hope today we have done that for you. So as we come to the end, Judge, just an advance warning, you're still going to have the parting thoughts in 30 seconds. So I'll just let you know, in 30 seconds, what do you want to leave our viewers with? But let me allow me to do my closing points here. Once again, we thank you for staying with us on this panel discussion. Do let us know what you think about our program. We genuinely want to welcome you to take time to write your comments in our chat. And a gentle reminder once again that you can support the campaign by donating generously to the QR code that's going to appear on your screen. And we'd also like to draw your attention to our next REALink virtual conversation session that will happen on Friday, the 6th of August at 7:30 p.m. Our guest speaker will be Andrew Ong, and he will be exploring what more can be done for the reintegration of former offenders. So join us for that session. But once again, closing thoughts, Judge, what would you like to leave with our friends today?
Well, thank you. I suppose just basically perhaps three thoughts. One is that, you know, if you're facing any difficulties, don't be afraid to speak out, right? There's nothing to be ashamed of. There are people out there to help you. And then, of course, listen to what's coming from the other side. It's not all about us. It's not just all about yourself, because we're all in this together. We're living in a community. And we really want this to be a better place, so make an effort to make it work. I mean, as Leonard says, right? Make it work together. Yeah. So I think that's it.
That's a nice way to draw our conversation to a close. And once again, remember, all these conversations are recorded and you can play that back and share it with your friends. So please join me in thanking former District Judge Low Lih Jeng and also Leonard Ng from LCCS for being part of the conversation series. We're not going to say goodbye. As usual, our tradition here is the journey continues. On behalf of this huge, beautiful LCCS production team, we say thank you and stay tuned with the REALink conversation series. Bye for now.